Welcome to the DMF. I am your host, Justin Yachts, and today my guest is Randy James. He is a personal manager. He has managed such people as Jenny Garth, Corbin Burnson, and James Franco, just to name a few. His father, Dennis James, was the first host of a network game show, and this is part one. Enjoy. Okay, I have a guest with me today. I have Randy James. How are you doing, sir?
I am doing great. I'm out here in Palm Springs, California, where the weather is at the moment amazing, and I'm sitting out in my backyard and thrilled to talk to you.
Awesome. You grew up in LA. What was that like?
I actually, I was born in New York, and my father was a television personality. He was a pioneer in television. His name was Dennis James, and has something like 30 firsts first to ever be on videotape, first to ever host a network game show. So I kind of grew up in the business. And at a certain point, the business, which was really the television business, which he was in, was very much New York centric. And at a certain point, more and more everything was coming out to LA. My dad got a job in LA, and so moved the family out to LA when I was 5. And I grew up in LA, stayed in LA, and until I moved back to New York in my early 20s to when I had a job that took me there.
Were you intrigued by show business at an early age?
You know, it's funny. I was so immersed in it because of my family. But the one thing that I learned from being in the business and being around people in the business, and my father's friends were all actors and so on, is that it's a very tough business to be. Well, it's a tough business in any aspect of it, but particularly to be in front of the camera. It was a very tough business. And in my mind, unless somebody was really, really good looking, really, really talented, or ideally both, you'd probably be better off trying to make a living elsewhere. So I never had any aspirations. I didn't check either of those boxes. And so I didn't have any aspirations to be in front of the camera. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew the entertainment industry from growing up in it, and I loved it. So what I did is I got a job when I was I lied about my age and said I was 18, but I was actually 17. And I got a job as a page at ABC, the television network ABC. And I think they still have page staffs at the networks. I think CBS still does anyway. But at the time, there were only 3 networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS. For your viewers, I'm really dating myself with that information. Now there's 503. But all of the networks had a program called the Page program, and pages were essentially it was an entry-level job that by design didn't pay well, and you would work on different aspects of the network's production. Usually it was production related jobs. So one day I'd be seating the audience at Happy Days. Another day I would be in the newsroom holding cue cards. Another day I would be, sitting in the control room on one of the network's variety shows, getting people coffee. And so it was fantastic because it gave young people who wanted to be in the industry but didn't really know what aspect of the industry might intrigue them. It gave them a way to watch and learn what everybody in a production environment does, and see what they gravitated to, what intrigued them, what maybe they had a particular aptitude for. And also you kind of had an inside line to stuff, because in those days the networks were they encouraged promoting from within the page staff, identifying people in the page staff that showed promise and promoting them from out of that page staff. So it's a shame. I don't think it really exists. I think because of economics over the years, typically what the pages did more than anything else was they dealt with audiences that were coming in to see the tapings of shows. And I mean, famously back on the Tonight Show when Johnny Carson was doing it, Johnny would feature the pages that, we all had to wear these jackets, these, nylon, horrible, jackets, ties and everything, and with a patch of the network. And Johnny would have fun with them. And I think if anyone outside of the industry, at least in those days, had ever heard of a network page, it was through the Tonight Show. But most shows, any shows that had an audience, had those people to do everything from hand out tickets on Hollywood Boulevard to get the audiences there, deal with them when they were lined up, seat them, all of that stuff. And I so that's what I did on most nights. I worked on Happy Days. I worked on Laverne and Shirley. I worked on Welcome Back, Kotter, with John Travolta. At one point I was assigned to answer the phones on the set because the show would, they'd rehearse all week and then shoot the show. And, I think it was on Fridays. So I'd be on the set all week during all the rehearsals. And if any calls came into the set for cast or whoever, I was the guy, sitting there and answering the phone. So that was cool. Because at the time, Welcome Back, Kotter was a huge hit. And I was the year that I was doing that, or the season that I was doing it, was the season that Travolta had just gotten Saturday Night Fever. He had shot it during his hiatus. And I remember him coming back the first day back, and everybody was saying, the cast was saying, "So how was it, man? Have you seen any of the movie?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "They showed me this one thing, the way the movie opens. I'm just walking down the street in these crazy high-heeled, platform shoes. And he goes, it's this really cool shot." And I remember him telling that story. And I don't think he or anyone in a million years realized what that movie was going to. I mean, he had gone from an unknown to being Vinnie Barbarino on Welcome Back, Kotter, and he was a huge television star. But I don't think he or anyone realized what the success of that movie would lead to in terms of the trajectory of his career.
It's kind of like Woody when he was doing, he was on Cheers, and then here he is now in Natural Born Killers. He's playing a completely opposite character.
Right.
So how did casting come about? How did you get involved in casting?
I was a page, and one of the things that I was assigned to do, I'll try to make this is a real boring story, but I'll try to make it as short as possible, was to go around. The network would have meetings with their affiliates and station owners and so on. Affiliates were independent stations around the country that would run ABC shows, and they'd have different kinds of conventions, meetings to, basically wine and dine these folks throughout the year. And I ended up, through people I met at the network, going to these meetings and helping organize and put on these meetings. And at one of the meetings, I met and worked with, at the time, the head of talent for ABC, a guy named Gary Pudney, who oversaw all of the talent and casting. And he liked what I did for him at the meetings, and he thought that I was competent, I guess. And so he hired me out of the page staff to work with him in the talent department in LA. And then the network hired an independent casting director named Joyce Selznick, who was the niece of David O. Selznick. And she was known as being having a great eye for talent, and had discovered many people through the years, Tony Curtis and David Hasselhoff, and just all kinds of different people. So the network hired her for one of their pilot seasons as an independent casting person to conduct talent searches around the country. And my boss assigned me to go with her and sort of be the network liaison between Joyce and the network. And so it was a fantastic experience for me because I was literally on the road with this woman who at the time was a legendary casting director. And she kind of took me under her wing and took a liking to me. And I would sit in all of these casting sessions, and an actor would come in, and she was like, Phoebe Cates came in and read for us. And she would, when Phoebe left, she would say, "This girl's going to be a star, and here's why." And so she really, I was so fortunate because it was like, imagine now they have on the internet, they have master class, where famous people do I mean, this was literally that. Here was somebody who, I don't know if she knew it at the time. I suspect she did, but she had cancer, and she didn't live very much longer after that. And I felt like she was trying to pass something on to me. And it was a very successful trip that we had. I mean, we found Phoebe Cates, we found Michael Madsen, we found Tom Hanks, and put Tom Hanks into Bosom Buddies. They'd already cast Peter Scolari in the show, and they couldn't find the guy to play opposite Peter Scolari. Scolari had already done a lot of work, and he was sort of like the known actor. Tom was a completely unknown actor, and we put him, not me, I had nothing to do with it, but out of that talent search. And Joyce went back, and she was a very persuasive woman, and she convinced the network, who was very reluctant, by the way, to cast this total unknown in the starring role in this show, that the network was very high on this pilot. And she convinced them single-handedly to do it. And the rest is history. We found a lot of people out of New York, and we didn't have the network didn't have a casting person there. So she went to the president of the network on her last day. He invited her into his office to thank her. And she went in and basically told him, "Look, it's crazy that you don't have a primetime casting office in New York. There's so much talent there, and you should have one. And the guy that should be running it is Randy James." And so they basically called me in, my immediate boss, and the president called me into the office and said, "We're opening a New York casting office, and we're putting you in charge of it." And I thought they were completely out of their minds. And by the way, they were, because I really didn't know what I was doing and had no right to have that job. But, the expression, fake it till you make it. So they said, "Do you think you can handle that?" And I said, "Absolutely." And they shipped me off to New York City.
For people that don't realize, like, there was no internet. There wasn't anything to like learn this, and like you couldn't go and like watch, YouTube videos of people how to do. You had to like figure it out the old-fashioned way.
Right.
And now you had Selznick there, who was teaching you like little things. What were some of the little things that she taught you?
The one thing that she said that I still resonates with me today, and is so true if you think about it, because the casting process is, you are seeing people come in and read the same scenes over and over and over again. I mean, we had scenes, specific audition scenes. They call a scene that you audition with sides. So we had sides from all of our pilots, from all the roles. So we would do a day. We were in each city, like typically 4 or 5 days, a week, let's say. And so each day we would do a few hours, couple hours cast, looking for women for one role. So you hear the same scene over and over and over and over again. And what she said and it's just a natural part of being a human, that if you've heard the same scene over and over again, if you're not intrigued, your mind starts to wander, and also you kind of know if somebody's right or not in the first few seconds. And what she said to me is, when somebody comes in and they start to act, And even though you've heard the scene 30 times, you can't take your eyes off of them. And it doesn't mean because they're particularly gorgeous or whatever, but there's just something about them that's interesting, that's compelling. That's star quality. And that's what you want to look for whenever you're casting a role. It's really an intangible thing that you can't really put your finger on, and I mean, I've had situations where when I was in New York and I had this job, every agency, I sort of had almost an open door policy with agencies to a certain extent, especially when it wasn't pilot season. Since my job was to, find new people, I would say, listen, send me the top 20 people that you think could be on an ABC series. Send them in to me. And, they can do whatever they want to do. They can, come in and pick a scene, do whatever they want to do. And so and one of the agencies was the Ford modeling agency and the Elite modeling agency, which were two of the top agencies. Well, really all the modeling agencies in New York. And I would say to them, send in girls and guys that aspire to be actors, or maybe have had some acting training, but are just making their living as models. I mean, later, maybe we'll talk about Corbin Burnson, who was one of my first clients and is still a client. And he was a model in New York. And so I've read some of the most gorgeous human beings on the planet. And that it isn't just about looks, because most of these people that, I was starting to think about where I wanted to go for dinner that night, or do I need to pick up my dry cleaning in the middle of their scenes, because they just, there was nothing about them that was holding my interest. And then other people would come in that there was just some quality that they had, or they did something really interesting with the audition. And what I say to my own clients is, because sometimes I will coach, I'm not an acting coach, but I've sat through enough auditions to know what makes an audition work and what doesn't. And what I say to my own clients is similarly, look, you're going to read for somebody who has heard this scene maybe 100 times. Look at this scene and look for the less obvious choices that you might make that still serve the goal of the scene, the purpose of the scene. The scene still has to work. Most scenes have a goal of what the characters are trying to accomplish, or what the writers are trying to accomplish through the characters in the scene. Those goals still have to be met, but instead of going for the obvious choices, come up with choices that maybe everybody else hasn't picked. And maybe at the end of the day, it's not the choice that if you get the job, they'll end up directing you to use on the set. But what it says to the casting director, who, by the way, has also watched, they've watched 100 of these scenes and seen the same thing every time. What that says to the casting director is, oh, this guy's thinking. He's really used his head to come up with a different approach. It's not the approach we want, but that was a really interesting choice that guy made that nobody else made. Maybe he should have a callback, and we can direct him a little bit in the callback. But that shows me that this is an actor who is creative, who thinks outside the box, who's not just looking for the obvious choice that everybody else is. So that's one bit of advice that came out of what Joyce taught me, which was what makes this person so interesting that you can't take your eyes off of them. And a lot of times it was because they didn't do the same thing that everybody else did, which was the obvious choice on the paper.
Do you find that a lot of actors, do you think that's the biggest problem with a lot of actors, is going for the obvious choice?
I hate to generalize, but I think that may be true, because it's a very scary thing, especially if an actor doesn't get a lot of opportunities. It doesn't get a lot of auditions. Somebody gets an opportunity to read for something. Their inclination, maybe on a subconscious level, is to play it safe, and not just with their choices, but in terms of their specific choices but in terms of their energy, I think a lot of actors are so afraid of making asses of themselves that when, no matter what they might do in an acting class because it feels safe, they may be afraid to do in an audition situation because there's an inner voice saying, don't mess this up. And so even if it's not a conscious voice, there's that inner voice, which is the opposite of what of what acting should be. Acting should be the ability to be someone that you are not, and to go out and not care about making a fool of yourself. And there's a lot of that's I think is a reason that a lot of people go into acting. I've always said that I think people go into acting for two different, again, wild generalizations. So this isn't everybody, but in my mind, there are people who are extroverts who go into acting because in school they were the guy that was always on or the girl that was always on, and everybody said, you should go be an actor, you're really funny, or you're this or you're that. And yes, that definitely makes sense. But there's another group of actors, and James Franco was a client that we launched his career, and he falls into that category. In person, especially if you look at old interviews of James when he was very young, Freaks and Geeks, and even the first Spider-Man movie, he was painfully introverted and very kind of socially awkward, a brilliant guy, but very kind of socially awkward. And for him, acting was a way of stepping outside of himself and becoming characters that where he was comfortable being someone else, because he was in his mind, he wasn't him anymore. He really became these other characters. And I think it was a freedom for him and a release for him. And I think there's a lot of actors that fall into that category, where they acting is almost like a therapy or an escape from what they feel may be trapped in their own personalities.
Do you think like you said, they can take an acting class where, they're comfortable taking, giant, making big choices. But then when they go into the room, they, like, well, I don't know. I don't want to upset them or something, or I don't think that's right. Or they'll second guess themselves. Do you think the training is leading to that? Or do you think it's just nerves?
I think the training may be leading to it only because they may not. A lot of acting teachers are just that. They teach you to act, but they don't often prepare people for the audition process of actually getting a job. A lot of acting teachers have not really had careers. They haven't become successful themselves. And this isn't a put down for acting.
Yeah.
There are a lot of terrific actors that for one reason or another never really got the careers they wanted, but they are exquisitely qualified to teach acting. There are a lot of hugely successful actors that are not qualified to teach acting because they know how to do it themselves, but knowing how to do something yourself and teaching someone else to do it are maybe two different skill sets. So there's the fact that they haven't been prepared for it. Now there are more and more, there are people in the business, and we send some of our young clients to an acting school and coach that does focus on the process of getting a job, an auditioning. And I think that's really important. But yes, to your original question, the process of getting going into an audition room and getting a job is extremely intimidating. Now, out of COVID, that very rarely happens anymore, because by necessity during COVID, all casting directors started seeing auditions on tape because they couldn't read actors in the room. And what they learned from that was, wow, I can see 10 times the number of auditions when people are self-taping, because when you bring an actor in the room, first you got to do a little bit of, some cast directors just get right into it, but typically they're like, how you doing? How's your day? Blah, blah, blah. Any questions? Whatever. And sometimes there's 2 or 3 audition scenes. And But even if there's only one and it's 2.5 minutes long, most casting directors are not going to cut an actor off who's been working on this, at home for God knows how many days after 30 seconds and say, thank you. I've seen everything I need. Bye-bye. It's a cold business, but for the most part, it isn't that cold. But if you think about it, the casting director, they know what they're looking for. And going back to Joyce Selznick's thing to me about if you can't take your eyes off of them, they've got something. A good casting director can tell in 30 seconds if this person is a possibility and they should continue to watch the scene, or if they're not going to fit the role. And then they have the luxury of going to the next person. So what a process that used to take at best 5 minutes to read an actor, and it's usually longer than that, now can literally take 30 seconds. So they can see, I'm saying 10 times as many auditions, but it's probably more than that in a day. So I don't think that it will ever go back to in-person interviews. It does on the final callbacks today, when a director and producer, studio executives want to really meet the person and get a sense of them, and they want to take a lot of time. And it's down to, a handful of choices. But first auditions and probably the first callback session, at least, will not be in person. I mean, I've had a lot of callbacks that have gone on Zoom, and people have gotten jobs off of the Zoom callback and never met in person. But the audition, so that, I think for actors, that's actually a good thing, because you can send in your self-tape, whatever self-tape you want to. You can do it 10 times, and you can at least you're sending in the audition you want them to see at the end. When you're going into the room, you're going to get one shot at it, and you may screw it up, you may flub a line, your energy may be low, you may be nervous. That's your shot. And so that is an excruciating process for a young actor, because there's so many, the nerves are such a factor. My clients that are more seasoned actors don't like the process because they want feedback. They want to go into a room and they know that they can say to the casting director, I'm going to try something here, but please stop me if I'm on the right track. And they want some direction, because my seasoned clients complain that I'm just guessing at what they're looking for. I could do this scene 10 different ways, and each way for me might be a viable option. It might be a viable way to go, but I don't know what they want. The whole self-tape thing is a maddening process for certain actors, because they feel like they're just guessing at one of 5 different ways that they can go with this character, So, but I think that the old process that's now, 3 years old, of going into a room is a very intimidating process for most actors. And I think if not on a conscious level, it's subliminally, unless somebody is really on top of their own biofeedback and kind of programming their brain, it can subconsciously put a little bit of a wet blanket because people are afraid to take risks. Again, generalization, but I think that's a tough hurdle, if nothing else, for I think most actors to work through.
Okay, that about does it for part 1 of my interview with Randy James. I hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank him personally for his time. As always, you can find me at Justin Yachts. Please like, share, and subscribe, and consider checking out the YouTube channel. And I will see you next time on the DMF.